Good afternoon and welcome to State Senator Rita Sanders, legislative candidate from District 45. Thank you, Senator, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today are advocacy lead volunteers Joyce Beck, Bob Lassen, and Mike Barwig. Senator Sanders, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. Again, as a reminder, we are recording and this will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. So to start us off, Senator Sanders, if you want to start by giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign, we try to keep that at 5 minutes or less, that would be great. And then once we've completed that, we'll move into the questions. So I'll pitch it back to you, Senator Sanders. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Gina. So yes, my name is Rita Sanders. I represent District 45, which is right in the heart and the center of Bellevue, from the river to about 25th to 36th Street. Right in the middle of my district is Offutt Air Force Base. While that is federal property, that also leans towards other issues that we have that are unique in the state of Nebraska. But we are the oldest city in Nebraska, so I think we probably have one of the most oldest population in Nebraska. I'm one of them. I am part of the baby boomers, so I get that. My husband and I, on the personal side, we are real estate developers in Bellevue. Our last development is a senior retirement, independent assisted living and memory support. And that's something near and dear to my heart. And that population, there's a wide variety of issues to deal with, not just the retirement and the pensions and the affordability of senior living, but also healthcare. So we're very involved in memory support, the Alzheimer walk, and those things that particularly affect the senior population. I was mayor for the city of Bellevue for 8 years. I took that on as we developed our piece of property in Bellevue. There was a lack of understanding in the political, in the policy making and the structure of economic development in the city, and we were living it. So when we got through that gauntlet of developing our business in Bellevue, we were asked to run for office. You know, you've been through it, you understand what we need, you understand how to work through that system. And it wasn't about 10 years later that I was able to look at a position that fit me, and that was the mayor's position, and ran for that office, not knowing what I was doing politically. And there were 4 men and me in that race. And I did win, and I served 2 terms, so 8 years. And again, that's a wide variety of things that a mayor has to deal with in the city, not just economic development. But that opened up my eyes to other issues that we as everyday citizens don't see in our community, just because that's kind of not our wheelhouse, or it's not, I'm not driving to the high school anymore, so I don't see high school issues anymore. So it was a great job to have, to look at the broad issues in the city, let alone now in the state. So I think I have a little bit of experience in dealing with local issues, as well as now 4 years of the legislature.
Wonderful, Senator Sanders. Thank you again for your leadership in the legislature the past 4 years. We've appreciated working with you. Our next section, of course, is on the questions, and we have provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50-plus in Nebraska. Again, we're trying to stay at the 5 minutes for each question. They are pretty intensive and packed questions, so bear with us on that. And again, we may be surface level on this, but I know being in the legislature, you're probably familiar with a lot of these issues. So question 1 is on health, caregiving, and home and community-based care, and Joyce Beck is going to take that. So go ahead, Joyce.
Thank you, Senator Sanders, for giving us some of your time, because we know how busy you really are. I also have a lot of interest in memory care. I was a nursing home administrator part of my career, and I always had dementia units in all of my nursing homes. So I have that connection with you. 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say staying in their homes as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services and area agencies on aging become important assets to caregivers as they care for loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of their local ones, of their loved ones, but it also provides relief to an already strained long-term care industry. We have two questions for you, Senator Sanders. What would you do to protect and/or expand the home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention of a sufficient workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? And my second question would be, what will you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska?
Wow, I don't have a magic wand, but let's see if we can get through this. This is, we hear about this every day. I think, first of all, in protecting home and community, that we would like every senior, everybody to have a choice in where they get their health care and where they find to be their home. Sometimes, right, we have to look at the affordability piece, and it's very expensive to keep someone in the home if they can't afford to stay in the home. And that's why we look at community-based, right? You can share a lot of those costs. This is why I happen to be in that business. We can share food costs, we can share electricity costs, and to me that it makes one of the most sense, right? But if someone wants to stay in their home, perhaps we can look at this caregiving service should be probably a combination of volunteer. Hopefully we can get back to what has always been the neighborhood model, where neighbors help neighbors. And then the piece that they probably need to pay for would be the medical side of it, right? Who's coming in to check the meds, who's providing the meds? That's a very important piece. And I don't have the magic wand, but I think we need together to have that conversation. One of the conversations I've had most recently is the amount of nursing homes that have closed down in the state of Nebraska is a concern, because it's the lack of workforce as well as funding for that. I was in a conversation on legal immigration. We have a Filipino population that is here that helped us in our nursing homes and in our hospitals during the COVID period. And we can continue the legal immigration. There's a whole lot of Filipinos that are still insisting that America is their dream. And we need to take a serious look at that. They have the talent, they have the knowledge, they have the caregiving abilities, and they want to be here. So how are we on the federal side understanding that? So that's, I think, where we come in, you come in, is to make sure, not just on the local state level, that we are working with our federal agency to figure this out. We in Nebraska have a very, very low unemployment rate. So we have to look outside of Nebraska or get very creative on how we get that workforce here. So, but I think AARP should start maybe even in the 40s and the 30s, so people understand, what does it cost to even stay in your own home or to be in community living. I have a lot of young kids that work for me, and they're like, oh, it'll just happen. People will take care of me. But there has to be a real understanding of what does that mean. So it's multifaceted. I don't have the magic wand, but I think it's important that we work with our federal delegation on this.
Senator Sanders, I appreciate your answer, and I'll let you know that I worked with a lot of Filipino legal immigrants, and their skills were fantastic, and we helped them get all the way through to citizenship. And it's very rewarding because they wanted to be in the United States, like you said.
Yeah. And I think I have another calling when I'm done as a legislature. I used to work for Congressman Fortenberry on the federal side, so I got a little taste of that. But I'm going to just kind of narrow it down to the Filipino population that I've really gotten to know. When they do come here and help us, it's a cost to them. It's a cost of about $5,000 to $10,000 for them to get all of their paperwork to come here to help us. But it's the American dream, right, that they're after. Same in our military. We have many Filipinos that join our military and fight for our country with the hopes of citizenship. And if they are offered citizenship, it's between 5 to 10,000.
Yes.
And they have fought for our country. So we need to pay attention to that, because we want to open our arms to people that want to help in the medical side, on the senior citizen side, and welcome them and make them part of our community, which led me to the bill that I had on the first ever American Asian Commission here in Nebraska. And hopefully that can tie a lot of things together as far as trade, workforce, and our current needs right now.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for the
the
question.
work you do.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the question, Joyce. And thank you, Senator Sanders, for your answer on that. And I completely agree. The Filipino population has some of the best caregiving skills you could ever ask for. And I have watched many of those workers in action, and we are very blessed to have them. So I do hope we can work through some of those federal snags to get more of those possibilities in the state. I also, before we move on the caregiving side, I want to personally thank you for your co-sponsorship of LB 937 last session, which was the caregiver tax credit bill. I know you signed on to that bill very early on, and while it's a small tax credit, I really want to thank you very much for standing behind caregivers and understanding the importance of those that are our unsung heroes in our homes that are providing that care to our those that need it most. So thank you for that. Our second question now comes from Mike Barwig, and it addresses consumer fraud, exploitation, and protection. So Mike, I'll let you have it.
Good afternoon, Senator Sanders. Glad you're here. So scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams such as wire transfers, gift card scams, and schemes involving real property. Nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. With that in mind, our questions for you are: consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online, financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to address and ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive or unfair business practices, and provide opportunities for redress to victims of fraud? In other words, would you support 1, enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices? 2, enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund? And 3, implementation of preventative or corrective measures to assist in combating owner-seller housing impersonation fraud?
Right. Thank you for those 3 questions. And I would support all 3 of them. I believe we had that discussion last session about the grocery stores and putting up a sign. And I think that's a very important piece, is working with the industry. That's the go-between. This just happened recently to a good friend of mine. She received a phone call, one of those phone calls, you have a grandson and they're using voiceover, and she ended up having her caregiver drive her to a Bitcoin machine. And thank God the Bitcoin was in like a gas station. I think they sell vaping things in there as well. He unplugged the machine and said, "No, you cannot do this. This isn't what the business is set up to do." And she left, but the guy was still on the phone and directed her to another place. So we need to educate those seniors that 911 is the first call they should make. That person on the other line will call them back if it really is their son. But they have to call the police, or the police can't protect them, right? Because every time I engage in conversation with law enforcement, their hands are tied as well, unless it's reported. And even when it's reported, there are laws to protect the criminals, right? So we all need to understand what those laws are, but I'm happy to support 1, 2, and 3.
Good.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Senator Sanders, and thank you for your advocacy. Again, last session, we did have the gift card payment scam bill and looking to bring that back or maybe and expand that. And again, these other two ideas are kind of percolating also of, obviously have to work with the Attorney General's office and that. So more to come, but we do appreciate your leadership in those issues as well. Moving on then, our third question, and this kind of moves over into more of the housing and the livable communities arena with helping people stay in their homes and communities. So Bob Lassen's going to address that. So go ahead, Bob.
Okay, this should be right in your wheelhouse, having been a mayor. You probably are familiar with most of this. Anyway, AARP's goal is to allow people to age in place and stay at the lowest level of care and cost as long as they can. Okay, that's our guiding factor. And there are two areas that I wanted to talk to you about today. One of them was zoning, and the other one was property tax and just taxes in general for the elderly. So the zoning obstacles that we see in most cities allow just single-family residential homes. In these communities, zoning does not include other housing types, such as accessory dwelling units, ADUs, manufactured homes, intergenerational duplexes, or apartment buildings that may be better choices for some of these elderly, particularly if they're looking to move downsized, from the house that they're in. So that is part of the first question. The second question deals with the property tax issue. And again, this is a buzz for everybody. But this is the most burdensome tax for homeowners with low incomes and the elderly. And they can be taxed right out of their homes, which in many cases has happened. And then I'm going to talk briefly about the homestead exemption plan too. So the first question is, Nebraskans over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population. And research shows that most want to remain in their homes and communities as they age. As housing costs continue to increase, older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs when seeking to downsize, and thus are being pushed out of communities and homes that they lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as these accessory dwelling units, intergenerational housing pads, something like that, manufactured housing, or just townhomes in general? And the second part of this is, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans that qualify continue to have access to the tax relief program that allows them to age in place?
Yes, yes, and yes. So I think the remain in their home and or housing that needs better policies, better so the planning department needs to put some policies in place to allow that to happen. So I would navigate through this discussion first to get the governor on board, right? If we are going to go into communities and say, hey, if you could work with us on developing housing or remodeling housing and allowing for permits to let this happen. And I think we need to also look at the Hispanic community that does this really well with multi-generational housing. And that's sometimes a solution for the older person to give up the big part of their house. We did this with my mother. We put her in a mother-in-law apartment, which was an attachment to the house. And then the main house was used for the bulk of the younger generation, right? Where they can study and learn. And yet mom was still had her quiet time, but was able to have meals and to get care from others in the family that were there. But I think we need to go to these cities. We need to work with them, and they would want to be able to do this, that we have permits and inspection on board that understands this. And you can probably do that best with AARP on the national side at these conferences that planning and permits and inspections go to once a year, right? So they learn this on the national level, and then they bring it down to the community. But when they bring it down to the community, it's up to us to push for it in our community, right? Or they get complacent, or it's not happening in my community. So absolutely, I will help on every single avenue I can. When I look at what's coming up next session, I think I'm going to be bombarded on the education committee side as well as the government. But I think your bills might come through the government if it's about policy and permits. And so absolutely, I will be there for you. But we need that support from the governor. So maybe my question back to you is, where is your conversation with the governor on these issues?
Mhm.
And hopefully we can give him the information to gain more support.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. And again, yes, thank you for being a leader and supporting these issues in the past. And I'm thrilled that you have experienced that mother-in-law suite and that you understand how it works and how it works very well. And that is the key to kind of some of the things that we're trying to do. I will draw your attention, I'm sure you're familiar with LB 1165 and 1166 that Senator Lowe had introduced those in the Urban Affairs Committee, and unfortunately didn't get them out of committee. And of course, he's term limited. But Senator Armendariz has now picked up the reins and introduced an interim study resolution that will be having a hearing coming up here in October. And then plans to kind of look what some movement we can have to come to the table with the municipalities and that sort of thing. I think the concern from the bill's last session, what mainly was around that losing that local control of, again, what, the zoning requirements and, so I think what's their plan is, or what we're looking to do moving forward, is figuring out ways to incentivize municipalities and cities instead of mandating them, of how we can expand some of these types of housing that works in all communities, especially in our rural communities. So there are work groups working on that currently. Again, there is that interim study coming, and we're hoping that with that movement, we can come with some kind of some compromise to move things forward in the future. And we would hope, of course, that you're able to sign on or be part of that as we get that bill to the legislature. Again, appreciate your leadership on those housing issues. So thank you for that.
I'll try and calendar. You said LB 1165 and 66 will have an interim hearing in October.
Yeah, those were the bills, and the interim study resolution. I would have to look here. I'll follow up with you in an email, Senator Sanders. And again, it's Senator Armendariz is working that issue. So she's kind of taking the reins and moving it forward. So I will follow up with you on that and appreciate, again, your leadership on housing. So we're coming to the end of our meeting and our time frame. And in order to close things out, we always like to go back to the candidate and give you a few minutes to talk with us about, again, any other priorities that you have for serving in the legislature. You've kind of brought some of that to light, and we, again, have enjoyed working with you. But if there's anything, specific issues you want to address or anything, closing comments that you want to make, we'd be happy to give you that remaining time.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And while the aging population, the baby boomers, they are the largest population, right? And they have created a lot of economic development around their lifelong here on Earth. And so from disposable diapers, we went from cotton to disposable to technology, and now that is working against us, right? The technology and how that can be hacked, and the importance of protecting not just seniors, but all. But we're certainly learning a lot from that population and what has worked and what hasn't worked. And we've got to have that data. We've got to be sure we collect that data and use that data, because there's, as you know, working for AARP, there's another generation coming up right behind them, and they will have their own difficulties as well. And we need to be ahead of that, and can we? But my next 4 years here, I'll work as close as I can. I'm on government and education. We don't know until January if I still will be on those committees. First, I have to win the election, and but winning the election, I will continue to pay close attention to education and the government committee, but as well as AARP. My door is always open.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. We really appreciate your time and taking the time to visit with us. We wish you the best with your campaign. We look forward again to continuing to work with you in the legislature, and thank you again for meeting with ARP.
Thank you, Gina. And I should have wore my red t-shirt, but my other red
Thank
t-shirt
you.
that I have to wear when I'm not in my work clothes. So I appreciate all you do and thank you.
Thanks so much, Senator. Take
Thank
care.